Computer. Okay. So today we're going to look at who the Buddha was. All the world religions that have founders, not every world religion has a founder. Hinduism did not have a particular founder, but Buddhism does. Christianity does. There are certain important figures in Judaism, like, for example, Moses or Abraham. And we learn about the stories, the backstories, like who was this person? How did they come to be? And when we study Buddhism, the Buddha has a story, right? He wasn't always the Buddha. So who was he? And how did his own upbringing create the kind of person that he came to be? So let's take a look at the story of the Buddha. As a way of beginning to think about the story of the Buddha, I want us to do a little exercise here, and you can kind of answer these questions as we go. Just kind of silent. All right, let's see here. Sorry. Now, this slideshow was done in when I was teaching in class, so you don't have to stand or sit. But here's a question. Here's number one statement. If you agree or disagree, all Buddhists meditate. So if you agree with that, we'll put agree in the chat box, or if you disagree, put disagree. All Buddhists meditate.
I'm sorry, where's the chat box? Oh,
Great.
there it is.
I'm
Okay.
glad you asked that. So
I think I found it.
you found it? Okay, it's bottom of your screen there. Yeah, there's a little circle. So Lisa says disagree. Disagree. And Karima, are you able to find that? You may be muted right now. Okay, well, I'm going to keep going here. Okay, next question. The primary form of Buddhist meditation is mindfulness. Okay, Karima says disagree. Oh, okay, your internet's slow. Lisa says that, okay, so the primary form of Buddhist meditation is mindfulness. Lisa agrees with that one. Okay. Number three, all Buddhists are vegetarian.
Oh, no.
We're getting at our prejudices here. We all got them. Disagree? Disagree. Okay. Buddhists don't fight in wars. Disagree. Okay. All right. Buddhism is a philosophy, not a religion. Guys all disagreeing here, huh? The Buddha was a human being, not a god, and Buddhism has no place for the worship of gods. Okay, guys all disagree here. All spiritual traditions, Buddhism included, are different paths to the same mountaintop. Okay. All right, so actually, the answer to these questions are all negative. They're all of them are different. So if we look at the first one, All Buddhists meditate. A common perception of Buddhism in the United States is that it's associated with meditation. But the reality is that most Buddhists don't meditate. Most Buddhists, particularly ethnic Buddhists, by that I mean people that come from Asian countries like China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia. Majority of Buddhists don't actually meditate. This is something that's relegated for the most part to monks or nuns. And lay people tend to play more of a devotional role where they might be supporting the monks or the nuns, but not necessarily meditating. And that was my experience in Japan. Most of the Japanese don't actually practice formal meditation. The next one was primary form of Buddhist meditation is mindfulness. Actually, there's a lot of different forms of meditation within Buddhism, and mindfulness is only one form of that, but there's a lot of other forms of meditation that are more devotionally oriented. By that I mean connecting one's self with the Buddha, right? Seeing oneself as the Buddha is probably a more primary form of meditation. All Buddhists are vegetarian. That is definitely not true. Buddhists eat meat. In the monastery that I trained in Japan, the monks were happy to eat meat when they could get it. The vegetarian dishes were served in the monastery. The cooks didn't cook meat, but if a monk were to go out of the monastery for any reason to do errands or to buy food, they might buy meat, not just for themselves, but for the other monks that are in the temple, because there was an understanding that there was a lack of protein in the diet. And in order to get that protein, you needed to eat meat. So Buddhists do eat meat. That's a kind of a Western phenomena that's kind of today is kind of linked up with Buddhism. The next one, Buddhists don't fight in wars. I wish that was the case, but that's unfortunately not been the case historically. Buddhists have fought in wars. Japanese American Buddhists fought in the Second World War on the side of the United States. This is well documented. As well as Japanese Buddhists in Japan fought in the Second World War, and even Buddhist symbols were co-opted during wars, particularly the Second World War, to induce their fighter pilots to do kamikaze missions. So unfortunately, yes, Buddhists have fought in wars. Buddhism is a philosophy, not a religion. Actually, Buddhism is both. There's a very strong philosophical element within the Buddhist tradition, but there's also a more religious or devotional element to Buddhism. A lot of the sixth one was the Buddha was a human being, not a god. Yes and no. So there's a lot of reluctance, I think, amongst Western practitioners of Buddhism and perhaps also academics to refer to the Buddha as a god. And historically, he said that not to see himself as a god, to not turn himself into a god. He forbade, for example, the creation of images of himself after he passed away. And for several centuries after his death, the only images that appeared of the Buddha were of the bottoms of his feet. So no statues appeared for the first several hundred years after the Buddha's death. This changes, though, over the history of, over the next several hundred years. And for certain reasons, the statues of the Buddha do begin to appear, and Buddha does become worshipped, kind of similar, I would say, to the way Jesus is worshipped, or as a god. And the Buddha becomes associated with the entire universe. So there's from one view, Buddha is a human being. From another perspective, and as Buddhism evolves, Buddha takes on the attributes of the entire universe. Right? All spiritual traditions, Buddhism included, are different paths to the same mountaintop. Well, there also I'd have to say yes and no. One difference is that in Buddhism, there's as well as in Hinduism, there's an idea that one needs to escape or be liberated from the cycle of birth and death, so that one is not reborn into the world of suffering. And some traditions within Buddhism, as well as within Hinduism, kind of keep with that particular way of thinking, but other paths talk about returning to the world on purpose, so that all beings together become liberated from the cycle of suffering. All right. So there are some differences there, and we can also make some comparisons between the goals within Western traditions. Say, for example, salvation. Salvation might mean something very different to a Christian than it does to a Buddhist. What is salvation? What does that word mean for a Christian? To be saved, right? That might not be the same. That might not be something of interest to a Buddhist. Okay. Any questions to this point, to these points so far? All right, here's an opportunity for up to 10 points, extra credit. What changed with Buddha's teaching is that now I'm not thinking about, I think more about others. I realize that we are not alone. What words do you think what words can you fill in those blanks with? Just say them out loud.
I got this picture on some of the writing, the art faces. Is there a way to slide that over so I can see the rest of it? Because I can see about 2/3 of it, but 1/3 of the writing is gone.
Yeah, there's at the top right, there's like a little square.
The top right.
It says swap shared screen with video. You just keep clicking it until only the teacher shows up. If that makes sense.
Okay, so I can't get.
Another way to do
read it
this,
now.
Lisa, is if you put your if you take your pointer, and so you have the four images of who's in the class right now. Take your pointer and click on it and drag it over to the other side of the screen.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's much easier.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So well, I guess on the first one, and this is probably going to be a little maybe immature of me, but I'm not thinking about his stomach, because before, all I knew about Buddha was he had a big stomach. So,
Okay.
I would say what changed with Buddha's teaching is that now I'm not thinking about myself. I think more about others. I realize that everybody is linked. We are not alone.
Yes, yeah, I'd accept that, definitely. Yeah, Mike, I'll make sure you get those 10 points there. Yeah, what changed with Buddha's teaching is that now I'm not thinking about myself. I think more about others. So this is a quote from a Japanese Buddhist in the Pure Land tradition, Naoyuki Ogi. And he's basically sharing how Buddhism had changed his perspective on life. Right? I'm no longer thinking about myself. I'm thinking more about others. I realize that everybody is interconnected. We are not alone. Right? So that's the shift. That's the shift in thinking that takes place for somebody who practices Buddhism, or that should be the shift that takes place. If that shift doesn't take place, then I would say it's probably not Buddhism. It's probably not Buddhist, even if it's somebody that says they're Buddhist. That's an important shift. That's an important transformation that takes place for Buddhist practitioners. That movement. This is an image of my teacher, and again, you might have to move that, move the camera. You can also shrink it, right? If you see those three, there's like bars at the top of where the video is, where the videos are. And if you click on, there's like 2 bars, there's a one kind of big bar, and then there's a one real thin bar. If you click on that thin bar, you can collapse totally the image of everybody on the screen, or the names of everybody on the screen.
Well, I don't see that bar, but I only have your picture up there now, so.
Okay, if you right next to it, there should be another one. You click on it, it'll collapse even my picture.
Oh, I see it now. Okay, I've never seen that before. Okay.
Great, great. So this is this woman here on the left is Diane Banaj. She
That's
is
a woman?
yeah, that's a woman, right? So I want to tell you a little story about her, because this is my teacher, and she went to Japan when she was in her mid-20s. She first went there as the wife of a wealthy businessman, and then later, soon after, 6 years into her marriage, got divorced, returned to Japan, and became an English teacher, but also a classical ballet. She continued to study classical ballet, which she had been studying since she was 13 years old. And she lived in Japan, teaching English and performing as a classical ballet dancer for about 12 years, before she shaved all of the hair off of her head, as you see in this picture here, and became a Zen nun. So it's a pretty extreme event, because her hair prior to this was below her waist. So she had very long hair, took great pride in her hair. But a series of unfortunate events in her life led her to get to the bottom of her own suffering, including loss of love, and other events led her to seriously question what she was doing. And her 3 questions were: how can I see straight? How can I get to be real? Up to that time, she didn't feel like, she felt like she was a fake. She wasn't an authentic human. How can I live a life of no lie? How can I live in such a way that I don't feel like I have to tell lies about myself to other people? Okay, and this is these are all the D words that come to us from time to time: death, disease, disaster, deluge, divorce, discontent. Who among us doesn't experience life in this form of suffering? So the Buddha's teachings are about how do we deal with, how do we work with this suffering in our life? I'm going to pass through these here. So this is what the life of the Buddha is kind of pointing to. So what I'd like us to do, sorry about that. I'm going to stop sharing this. I've got the wrong PowerPoint up here. So let me, here we go. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about today is the first of the three treasures. So in Buddhism, we talk about what's called the three treasures. They are, as you see there, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So we're going to talk about the Buddha, and we're going to talk particularly about the historical Buddha, not the Buddha that comes to be over the centuries of Buddhism, but the actual person of the Buddha that was a human being that had a birth and had an awakening experience that taught for some 40 years of his life, 45 years of his life, and then passed away. We're going to talk about that historical Buddha right now. And we're going to start with the moment of conception. So in this image here, I think you should be able to see it. This is an image of his mother, and these images are drawn from a Japanese artist that went to India and was inspired by the way paintings were done in India. And I actually have copies of these paintings that you're about to see. So I just photographed them and included them in the slideshow here. But here's an image of his mother, Lady Maya. And you can see the white elephant here kind of above her. So she's dreaming. And she had this dream that a white elephant entered her side. And when she awoke, she had this such wonderful, beautiful, blissful feeling. And she knew she was going to have a son at that time. And this dream is said to be how the Buddha was conceived. So the Buddha was, from this perspective, was not conceived in an ordinary manner. He was conceived in a miraculous way. He was conceived through a dream. More miracles are on the way here. When the Buddha was born, so his mother, you could see her standing there. She was walking from the palace. So she was a queen. The Buddha's mother was a queen, Lady Maya. The Buddha was a prince. And when it came time for Lady Maya to give birth, she knew it would be any day. So she began the long walk from where she had been in the palace to her native home, to her parents' home. And along the way, in the forest around the sala tree, a forest of sala trees, she began to go into labor. And it said that the sala trees, the branches of the sala trees, lowered themselves down for Lady Maya to hold on to as she gave birth standing. And so that's miracle number one. Miracle number two is that when the Buddha was born, he took 7 steps. That's miracle number two, that he was able to walk as soon as he was born. Miracle number 3 is that under each of his footsteps, a lotus blossom bloomed. That's miracle number 3. And then 4th miracle, he spoke. You could see him in this image here, this famous kind of image with his right hand pointing up to the sky, his left hand pointing down to the earth. And he said, I alone am the world-honored one. So that's the kind of miracle surrounding his birth. Now, you may ask whether that really happened or not, or these just stories. For me personally, it doesn't really matter. If I were to find out that these miracles did not happen, it wouldn't change the way that I feel about Buddhism. Honestly, I kind of think they're just stories. And there's a lot, like any story, there's a literal meaning and there is a symbolic meaning to them. And there's deep symbolism in this particular story of of the conception and birth of the Buddha. As when the Buddha was born, they had a kind of a hermit astrologer come to make a prediction. The king wanted to know what would become of my son. Would he be able to be my successor in the palace or not? And the astrologer looked in the eyes of the baby Buddha and began to weep. Now, at this, King Suddhodana was very anxious. What's wrong? He asked. The hermit astrologer said, your son will either be a great king or he will become the savior of humanity. And I will not be around to receive his teachings. That's why I'm crying. So King Suddhodana was very disturbed by this dream. He did not want his son to become a great sage. He wanted him to become a successor. And so what he did was prevent the Buddha, his son, actually, he wasn't called the Buddha at this time. He was actually Siddhartha. That was his birth name. Siddhartha Gautama, born into the clan called the Shakya. So sometimes you hear the name of the Buddha being Shakyamuni Buddha. The Shakya is the clan that he was born into. When he was born, his name was Siddhartha. And King Suddhodana did not want his son to be a great sage. He wanted him to be the next king. He wanted a successor. He needed a successor. So he set up the palace so that Siddhartha would never have to see any suffering. He knew that if his son was around people who were suffering, he would start to question why he was alive, and that questioning would spur on the spiritual path. And the king did not want this for his son. So he tried to give him all of the pleasures that he could. He had him live in 3 palaces, one for each season. In India in those days, there were 3 seasons, not 4. A rainy season and 2 warm seasons. So the Siddhartha lived in the lap of luxury, the highest form of luxury that could be in those days. He had access to him all of the pleasure that he wanted, all of the greatest foods, the most fine and beautiful women, and everything that he wanted. But something didn't quite feel right for the Buddha. He knew something was wrong, for Siddhartha, rather. He knew something was wrong. And he decided to go out of the palace. He asked the king, I'm supposed to be the leader of this kingdom, but I don't even know who my people are. So can I go out of the palace and meet them? So the king said, absolutely, you may. But the king made sure that any kind of poverty or suffering that was exposed in the kingdom was cleaned up. He tried to make the kingdom look beautiful for his son, so the son would not have to worry about anything. However, Siddhartha met with what's called the 4 sights. He saw an old person. He saw a sick person. He saw a corpse. And those 3 sights he had never witnessed before, even though he was already about 29 years of age. He'd never seen an old person. He'd never seen a sick person. He'd never seen a corpse. He didn't know about these things. He didn't know that people died. He didn't know that people got sick. He didn't know that people get old. And this sent him into a tailspin, a mental tailspin. He couldn't understand. This is my fate. I am also of the nature to grow old, to get sick, and to die. I need to do something about this. The fourth sight that he saw was of a sage with a smile on his face, an old sage. And he knew he had something to learn from that sage. Soon after this event, when a cloud covered the entire castle, everybody was in a stupor. They couldn't wake up. But Siddhartha woke up in the middle of the night. He took his attendant with him, got on his horse, and went outside of the castle in search for the end to this suffering that he was experiencing, that he had now been witness to. And so they go. One of the first things he does once he's outside of the castle is to cut his hair. This is a symbol of renunciation. One's hair is a sign of one's beauty, and it could also be a sign of one's authority. So for the Buddha, for Siddhartha rather, to cut his hair was a rather serious undertaking. He cuts his hair, he gives the piece of hair that he cuts to his attendant to take back with him to his father, the king, to show him his seriousness. And he begins to practice. He begins to pray. He seeks out teachers in the forest, because in those days there were many people wandering ascetics, looking for the path to liberation, looking to the path out of samsara. This was a quest within Hinduism, within Hindu culture. So Siddhartha was no different from any other Hindu seeker, sage, looking for the end to samsara, the end to the suffering of birth and death. He was no different from any of them. He sought out several teachers, he practiced with several teachers, and was ultimately unsatisfied with them. He was given the opportunity to lead the community of these teachers, but declined because he felt he had not reached the end. He had not reached his goal. So he decides to take his practice to the next level. And he finds some ascetics in the forest that are practicing extreme forms of asceticism. They are eating 1 sesame seed a day. And so you can see there his body becomes extraordinarily thin. So thin, some images of the Buddha, you can see through his front side. You could see his spine through his front side. Siddhartha realizes that the only thing that he is going to attain from this kind of practice, and he does this for several months, if not maybe a couple of years, the only thing that he's going to attain is he will die, and without having attained enlightenment. And so he decides to change his asceticism, his ascetic practices. There's a young maiden that comes into the forest, and she's offering the gods in the forest rice milk, the water that the rice was used to wash in. But she sees this very sick man there, all thin and gaunt. But she also notices that he has some aura around him, and that aura draws her to him, and she offers to him the rice milk that she was going to offer to the gods. Siddhartha takes it, and he begins to nourish his body again. His ascetic friends have left him because they don't believe that he has accomplished his vows. But Siddhartha knows at this point that he needs to find what's called a middle way, a middle path between the extremes. As a young man, he had all of the pleasures of earthly life, and he realizes that that is not enough. So he practiced extreme forms of asceticism, denying himself all of the pleasures of earthly life. That was the other extreme. And for enlightenment, he has the intuition that there must be a middle path. And he begins to regain his strength, his physical strength. Once his strength is regained, his body is more healthy, he can think clearer, he resolves to sit at the foot of a tree until he attains the great awakening. This sitting at the foot of a tree was a common practice. That's what the monks did in those days. That's what the ascetics did. They sat at the foot of a tree. But his was a vow to not move until his enlightenment came to full fruition. And here we can see the temptations of Mara. In Buddhist lore, Mara is the Buddhist form of the devil, the tempter. And Mara tempts Siddhartha with three things: pleasure, women, and Siddhartha brushes them aside. He's not going to be distracted from his vow to attain enlightenment. So Mara gets super angry and sends warriors to fight him. And Siddhartha sees the delusion of trying to fight back. And the third thing that Mara delivers to him, why don't you just give up this practice? Go back to your kingdom. There's no way you can attain this in this lifetime. Enlightenment is something that takes many, many lifetimes. Go back, enjoy your life. And here you can see the Siddhartha presses the fingers of his right hand to the earth in what's called the earth mudra, famous mudra or hand position, the Buddha touching the earth. And he declares to Mara that the earth is his witness. In other words, the earth has known the previous lives of Siddhartha leading up to this moment, that Siddhartha has been practicing, has been training lifetime after lifetime. And now in this final birth, he will attain his goal of enlightenment. Here's another image of that earth mudra. This time it's the left hand touching, calling the earth to witness. The earth knows, the earth has eyes and ears and sees all of us. So that Siddhartha didn't need the acknowledgement of anybody. The earth was his witness. After this, he experiences enlightenment, he attains the great awakening and begins to teach. And the first people that he teaches are the 5 ascetics that he had left, that had thought he had broken all of his vows. They see him and he offers them the first teaching of the 4 noble truths, that there is suffering, that there is a cause to suffering, that there is an end to suffering, and that there is a path that leads out of suffering. This is what he teaches. The Buddha continues to teach for the next 45 years. So he begins his renunciation is at the age of 29. He practices as an ascetic for some 6 years. At the age of 35, he wakes up, he has his great awakening, and from the age of 35 to the age of 80, he teaches, and he gathers some 2,000 disciples, as well as lay people. He had enemies as well. One of his cousins tried to kill him on multiple occasions. There was a man that was a murderer who tried to kill him. He survived. But eventually, a layman who unintentionally gave him some food that was had mushrooms that were poisonous to him. He had great pains, it said, and a great deal of difficulty in the abdominal region of his body, and lies down for his final entry into what's called nirvana. And so he passes away at the age of 80. And the Buddha is always depicted in lying on his right side when we're referring to the Buddha in nirvana or entering into nirvana. The Buddha lies on his right side. These were the last words of the Buddha. You must be your own lamps, be your own refuges. A monk becomes his own lamp and refuge by continually looking on his body, feelings, perceptions, moods, and ideas in such a manner that he conquers the cravings and depressions of ordinary people and is always strenuous, self-possessed, and collected in mind. That's one source. Another source says, oh, okay, here's another image of the Buddha. All right, look at that, cut into a rock. The 5th century in India. Here's another statement from the last words of the Buddha. The true Buddha is not a human body. It is enlightenment. A human body must die, but the wisdom of enlightenment will exist forever in the truth of the Dharma and in the practice of the Dharma. Okay, I'm going to pause there. And for now, I'd like to ask you all to consider this story of the Buddha, which I just told, and make a comparison with the life of Jesus from what you understand, from what you know. So what I like you to do, I'm going to stop recording for the moment.